So recapping what we've seen so far of how to work with forms, we've seen that forms really are a wrapper around doing operations on a resource. Because in the world of Rails, the way we think about an app is a collection of resources and things that you can do on them. The RESTful actions of create, read, update, delete, and index. In particular, we saw that when you're creating or updating a resource and there's a human being on the other side of that process, someone using a web browser, there's really two interactions that have to happen. One of them is that the form itself has to be served. And if it's a create operation, that form is going to be blank and the user fills stuff in. If it is an update of an existing resource, the form will probably be pre-populated with the current values and the user can then overwrite them. And then there's a second action in which the user submits the form and some code in your app receives the form submission and does something with that data. So we saw that to work with forms, you need to address both of these. You have to have a way to generate and display that form so the user can see it, and you have to get a way to get the values that the user fills in so you can do something with them. So if we were to sort of summarize this as a kind of cookbook recipe, to create a submittable form means that you have to have a resource and an action. In other words, you have to have a route and a corresponding view that serves the form, whether the form is empty or pre-populated. And typically in Rails, that's going to be the new action or the edit action, respectively. When that form is created, you can use the Rails form helpers or you can construct the form manually. But either way, the name attributes on each of the form fields is what's going to get collected into the params hash when the user actually submits the form. And a nice bonus, if you do use the Rails form helpers like form with, then the attributes associated with the resource that that form is editing will all be collected into a subhash, sort of a nested hash inside the main params hash. So for example, params movie will itself be a hash whose keys and values are exactly the attribute names and attribute values on that resource, which is convenient because that is just about ready to pass to active record to create or update the resource. And remember, when we say it's almost ready, you also have to take that special extra action in your controller to bless the parameters that are allowed to be part of that update operation. Then you also have to have an action that receives the form submission. In other words, it receives those params and does something with it. In a typical Rails app, that will be the create or update action. And there have to be routes, actions, and views for each of those. So we will finish up our discussion of forms by talking about what do you do after a successful create or update.